Hollywood has always been a place where the brightest stars shine, where the allure of fame, fortune, and glamour paints a perfect picture. But behind the scenes, there's another story. A story of hidden identities, secret romances, and lives crafted for the public eye, hiding a truth most of us could never imagine. The golden age of Hollywood was built on more than just the glitzy costumes and iconic films. It was also built on secrets. And among the most shocking of those secrets, the legendary Errol Flynn, the quintessential ladies' man of his time, was living a life far different from what his public persona would suggest. Known for his roles in swashbuckling adventures and his dashing good looks, Flynn seemed like the ideal leading man, a man every woman wanted and every man admired. But behind closed doors, Flynn's life was far from ordinary, and there were whispers of a hidden side to the actor that would shock the world when it eventually came to light. For decades, the rumors about Flynn's private relationships remained just that, rumors. But what if we told you that Flynn was not only romantically involved with women, but he also secretly dated some of Hollywood's biggest male stars? What if the man known for his roles as a charming rogue was living his own secret love affair with other powerful men of the time? That's exactly what we're diving into in this video. Flynn's revelations were not just about him. They were about a hidden world in Hollywood that so few knew about, and even fewer dared to talk about. As a member of the Hollywood elite, Flynn was well aware of the consequences of his actions, the dangers of exposing his true self. The studio system in the 1930s and 1940s had no room for people who didn't conform to a specific ideal, and in those days, revealing one's sexuality, especially as a man, was career suicide. But Flynn wasn't like everyone else. As the years went by, he grew tired of living a double life and began to reveal some of Hollywood's deepest secrets. He named names, men he had been romantically involved with, men whose names had been buried beneath decades of studio-manufactured lies. And what was even more shocking, some of the names Flynn revealed were among the most powerful figures in the business, actors who had kept their own sexuality carefully hidden from the public eye. What led Flynn to take such a bold step? Why did he choose to expose a side of Hollywood that many would prefer to keep buried? And most importantly, who were the men behind the closed doors of old Hollywood? This is the story of Errol Flynn's secret life, a life that no one would have ever guessed, yet one that changed Hollywood forever. Let's dive into the world of Errol Flynn's hidden relationships and discover the stars who live in the shadows. Errol Flynn was the epitome of the swashbuckling hero, a true man's man whose charm and charisma made him one of the most beloved stars in Hollywood. In movies like Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Seahawk, Flynn played the daring, fearless hero, always the man who could rescue the damsel in distress, the guy every woman dreamed of. And off-screen, he was no different. Flynn was known for his numerous relationships with beautiful women, and he quickly became one of Hollywood's most notorious playboys. Flynn's image as a ladies' man was carefully cultivated, a part of the package that made him a box office sensation. His reputation as a heartbreaker, coupled with his good looks and rugged persona, made him a favorite among both women and men alike. But what many didn't know was that this carefully crafted image was just that, creation. It wasn't the whole truth. While Flynn's personal life was filled with well-publicized romances, marriages, and affairs, there was another side to his romantic history that no one knew about. Behind closed doors, Flynn was engaging in relationships with men, relationships that were kept far from the public eye. In the context of the time, this would have been career-ending. Hollywood was a place that demanded conformity, and any deviation from the expected norms could result in the end of a promising career. In fact, the Hollywood system was notorious for controlling every aspect of an actor's life, from their on-screen personas to their personal relationships. Studios went to great lengths to ensure that their stars fit a certain image, and any hint of scandal or deviation from this image was ruthlessly quashed. For Flynn, maintaining his reputation as a ladies' man wasn't just part of his brand, it was necessary for his career. To step outside of that image was a risk, one that Flynn chose to ignore for many years. His reputation wasn't just about his relationships with women, though. Flynn was also involved in some of the most outrageous public scandals of his time, including his infamous trial for statutory rape, a case that nearly destroyed his career. While the charges were eventually dropped, the trial damaged Flynn's reputation and caused a shift in how the public viewed him. This scandal, however, would only serve to further cement Flynn's rebellious nature and his willingness to take risks, even if those risks meant risking everything. Despite the scandal, Flynn's career continued to thrive. He was a star who could do no wrong, at least the public eye. But the more you look into Flynn's life, the more it becomes clear that his public persona was a far cry from the truth. The man who was adored by millions of women was hiding a truth that would eventually come out, a truth that would challenge everything we thought we knew about him. By the time Errol Flynn reached the peak of his career, his personal life was a whirlwind of rumors, speculations, and whispered secrets. He was a man who played by his own rules, flaunting his numerous affairs. But behind the facade of charm and celebrity, Flynn was hiding something much more profound. The deeper you dive into his history, the more you start to realize that the persona of the dashing leading man wasn't the full picture. It was a carefully constructed performance, one meant to cover up the complexity of his personal life. Flynn's relationships with men weren't just fleeting or casual. Some of them were serious and long-term relationships that he managed to keep hidden from the public eye for years. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s was a time and place where such relationships, particularly between men, could ruin a career. Being openly gay or bi was virtually impossible, especially for someone who was as high-profile as Flynn. In fact, the very idea of it would have been too dangerous to even hint at. Such rumors could swiftly end an actor's reign in the spotlight. It's easy to imagine why Flynn chose to keep his romantic relationships with men in the shadows. In an era when homophobia was rampant and LGBTQ+ individuals were forced to remain silent, many stars in Hollywood were coerced into maintaining a straight public persona, even if it meant hiding their true identities. For Flynn, this was more than just a matter of convenience, it was survival. But his need for privacy didn't stop him from finding others who shared his secret life. One of the key factors that enabled Flynn to carry on with his secret relationships was the culture of Hollywood itself. Studios controlled not only the image of their stars, but also their lives. Contracts were notorious for dictating everything from appearance to behavior, and any deviation from the norm was often met with harsh consequences. Flynn, a man who was used to living on the edge, played the game until he grew tired of it. For years, Flynn's secret romances remained just that, secrets. His close friends knew, as did some of the men who shared his affections. Yet, Hollywood's pervasive need for control over its stars kept these relationships buried. It wasn't until later in Flynn's life that the truth began to trickle out. With the rise of more progressive views on sexuality in Hollywood in the 1960s, and with an increasing willingness of stars to speak more freely about their private lives, Flynn saw an opportunity to finally break the silence. But Flynn's decision to reveal his relationships wasn't immediate. It wasn't just about the desire to finally live authentically. No, it was much more than that. He was pushing back against a system that had demanded his silence for so long. With the press becoming increasingly aware of his sexuality and the public's changing attitudes toward LGBTQ+ issues, Flynn slowly began to talk about the men he had been involved with. The men he named were not just any Hollywood stars, they were icons in their own right. Some had worked alongside him, while others were at the height of their own fame. The names Flynn revealed shocked many people, because these were the very men who, up until that point, had kept their own secrets locked away in the vaults of the Hollywood machine. What made Flynn's admissions even more groundbreaking was the timing. In the 1960s, the world was beginning to change. Hollywood, too, was starting to loosen its grip on its stars, and the era of the closet was slowly starting to crack open. Flynn's willingness to speak out during a time when the world was more receptive to LGBTQ+ stories was both revolutionary and risky. It gave the public a rare glimpse behind the curtain of Hollywood's carefully constructed images, showing that even the most famous and powerful men in the world had their own hidden lives. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that would shock the world. Flynn didn't just talk about his relationships with men. He gave names, he gave details, and he gave insight into a world that had been hidden for far too long. Errol Flynn was never one to shy away from the spotlight. He thrived in it. But behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood's golden age, his life was filled with secret liaisons, passionate affairs, and carefully curated relationships that no one ever saw coming. Among the most significant and shocking of these secret romances was his relationship with one of his famous co-stars, a man who was equally known for his charm, yet just as eager to keep his private life hidden. This man was none other than actor and leading man, Ramon Novarro. Novarro, who was celebrated for his roles in epic films like Ben-Hur, 1925, had a reputation for being one of Hollywood's brightest stars. His dashing good looks and powerful screen presence made him a favorite among female audiences, but behind the scenes, Novarro's own personal life was much more complicated. Like Flynn, he was part of the secretive world of closeted Hollywood stars, living in constant fear of being outed. Flynn's admission of his relationship with Novarro came as a huge revelation to many. The pair were not just colleagues but close friends, and their relationship extended far beyond the screen. Flynn, known for his wild reputation and infamous love life, was believed to have formed a deep connection with Navarro during the 1930s. Their bond became something more than friendship, even though neither of them could ever afford to be open about it. Their romance was entirely behind closed doors, an unspoken reality that only those closest to Flynn and Navarro knew about. The chemistry between them was undeniable, both on and off screen. Flynn was drawn to Navarro's exotic allure, his passion for life, and his ability to share the same secret world. Navarro, in turn, admired Flynn's boldness and charisma. Together, they created an electric bond that left those around them quietly speculating about their closeness. But like most relationships in Hollywood during that era, theirs was short-lived, mostly because of the industry's stringent expectations and the pressure they both faced to maintain a heterosexual image. For Flynn, being associated with another man in an intimate way was dangerous, not only for his career but for his public image. And for Navarro, the fear of being outed was even more acute. The two men may have shared intimate moments, but they also understood the boundaries they had to keep. Flynn's relationship with Navarro eventually fizzled out, but the mere suggestion that they had once been involved in a romantic and sexual relationship sent shockwaves through the Hollywood community. Despite the pressure from the studio system to maintain the illusion of their heterosexual personas, the truth about their bond became more and more difficult to suppress. What makes this revelation particularly striking is how it challenges the narrative Hollywood had spent years constructing. Actors like Flynn were marketed as virile, straight heroes, symbols of masculinity. Yet their hidden relationships with other men serve as a reminder that even the most public figures had to grapple with their own desires and identities in private. For Flynn, admitting his relationship with Navarro wasn't just about revealing his personal life. It was about breaking free from a suffocating system that demanded perfection and conformity. This public acknowledgement gave Flynn the chance to embrace his own identity more openly, though it came with its own set of risks. Flynn and Navarro's romance marked a defining moment in Hollywood's hidden history, one that would continue to be explored and revealed in the years that followed. The era of keeping everything secret would slowly come to an end, with more and more actors finding the courage to live authentically. For Flynn and Navarro, their love story was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, an intricate web of secrets and desires that Hollywood would rather have kept buried forever. As Flynn became more vocal about his relationships with men, others in Hollywood started to open up as well. But it wasn't just the actors. Some of the biggest names in the industry were implicated in the scandalous world of closeted gay romances. What had once been an unspoken part of Hollywood's glitzy world was starting to break into the light, thanks to men like Flynn who were willing to push boundaries and speak their truths. Errol Flynn's most publicized romances were often with women, yet it was his relationships with powerful men behind the scenes that truly opened the floodgates to the untold story of Hollywood's hidden affairs. While many saw Flynn as the ultimate ladies' man, those closest to him knew the truth. His romantic entanglements with men in the industry went far beyond casual affairs. Among the most surprising revelations were his intimate relationships with influential studio executives, individuals who held the keys to Hollywood's most coveted roles. These men were not just Flynn's lovers but also his allies, playing a role in shaping his career while sharing private, behind-the-scenes moments that would have ruined their own careers if they were ever exposed. One such powerful executive was Jack Warner, co-founder of Warner Brothers, the studio that made Flynn a household name. Although it was widely known that Flynn had a close working relationship with Warner, it was much more than just professional. Jack Warner, the man who helped make Flynn a star, was deeply involved in his personal life in ways that would shock the public if they ever found out. The two men developed a bond that went far beyond studio meetings and film sets. Flynn, known for his charisma and bravado, found himself drawn to Warner's own enigmatic presence and power in Hollywood. Warner, who was fiercely protective of his star, often went to great lengths to keep their connection under wraps. However, in an era when homosexuality was a taboo subject and highly dangerous to reveal, the relationship was necessarily kept hidden from the prying eyes of the press. The nature of Flynn's connection with Warner was carefully shielded from the public. Both men understood that if the truth about their closeness were to come out, it could not only jeopardize their respective careers, but also shatter the illusions that Hollywood had worked so hard to create. In a time when rumors of homosexuality could be career-ending, both men took great risks to maintain their bond. But this was far from the only powerful man Flynn had relations with behind closed doors. Flynn also had relationships with other top Hollywood figures, executives whose names were synonymous with the industry's elite. While Flynn's career flourished due to his immense talent and star power, it's clear that these relationships played a role in advancing his career as well. Some have speculated that these connections were used as leverage by both Flynn and the executives, fueling his rise to fame while also keeping their private lives a closely guarded secret. As a man who was constantly navigating the public eye, Flynn found that his relationships with these men were more than just romantic liaisons. They were an essential part of his survival in Hollywood. These connections helped him land the biggest roles, secure contracts, and stay relevant in an industry known for discarding stars who no longer held the public's attention. Yet, these secret relationships weren't without their toll. Flynn, like many of his contemporaries, had to live with a constant fear that the truth would eventually come out and end his career. This fear made the relationships all the more complicated and strained. The reality of Flynn's relationships with executives shows just how deeply ingrained secrecy and repression were in Hollywood at the time. These men weren't just sharing intimate moments with a young, talented actor. They were risking everything they had built in their careers to keep their own hidden desires alive. It was a dangerous game, one in which both Flynn and the studio executives played their roles, keeping up appearances while living a completely different truth behind the scenes. What makes this story all the more intriguing is how it sheds light on the hypocrisy of Hollywood's elite. While Flynn was celebrated on screen for his swashbuckling roles and rugged masculinity, the men who controlled his career were often just as secretive about their own lives. The very industry that had built its success on promoting idealized images of love, adventure, and romance was simultaneously hiding the love stories that didn't fit the mold. This was a Hollywood where appearances were everything, and the truth was something that could ruin lives and careers. As Flynn revealed more about his past relationships, he made it clear that these connections with powerful men were not simply about fame or fortune. They were about identity, survival, and ultimately, the freedom to live a life outside the constraints of the industry's rigid expectations. His willingness to speak out against Hollywood's facade and name the names of those who shared his private world was a groundbreaking moment that forced a reckoning within the entertainment world. This part of Flynn's story was one of the many facets of Hollywood's hidden history that would only come to light years later. The consequences of these secret relationships weren't just felt by Flynn and the executives involved, they reverberated throughout the entire industry, forever altering the way we think about the intersection of fame, power, and personal identity. Errol Flynn wasn't just a household name for his on-screen adventures. He was also a magnet for Hollywood's elite and a player in some of the most sensational off-screen affairs of his time. One of the most shocking aspects of Flynn's private life was his rumored relationships with other major stars, many of whom were also hiding their own secrets. As one of the industry's biggest heartthrobs, Flynn was inevitably linked with some of Hollywood's most famous women. But what many didn't know was that his love life was not confined to heterosexual relationships. The web of Flynn's secret affairs extended to some of Hollywood's other biggest stars, creating a scandalous undercurrent that was kept hidden from the public eye. One of the most notorious affairs was with the dazzling actress and Flynn's co-star in The Adventures of Robin Hood, Olivia de Havilland. While many fans and critics believed their on-screen chemistry was purely professional, behind the scenes, the two stars were often seen sneaking away for private rendezvous. What was even more shocking was the truth that Flynn's affair with de Havilland wasn't purely one-sided. Both shared a deep attraction, but Flynn's feelings for de Havilland were much more complex. Their relationship, though full of passion, was tumultuous and marked by secrecy. Both stars knew that their affair would create a scandal, especially given the public's perception of Flynn's status as a leading man and de Havilland's wholesome, pure image. But there were others, more daring, more open about their feelings for Flynn, who were far less interested in conforming to Hollywood's constraints. One such figure was the glamorous and iconic Joan Crawford. Flynn and Crawford shared a famously volatile and secretive relationship, one that would have shocked the public if ever exposed. The two were often spotted together at the most exclusive parties, their chemistry palpable. But what was even more shocking about their affair was the rumors that Flynn's relationship with Crawford was more than just a passionate fling. It was a desperate attempt to maintain a sense of control in an industry that was constantly trying to manipulate his image. Crawford, who was known for her own history of scandals, reportedly was aware of Flynn's hidden relationships with other men, and she didn't mind. In fact, their affair became a way for both of them to defy the rigid expectations placed on them. In private, they were free to express their desires without fear of judgment. Flynn's willingness to have affairs with both women and men became a reflection of the changing times in Hollywood, where closeted relationships were still the norm, but whispers of rebellion were beginning to surface. Flynn's relationship with women in Hollywood, wasn't just limited to actresses. The elite of the industry, including powerful producers and directors, were also part of his world. Some of the most famous names in Hollywood were said to have shared intimate moments with Flynn, whether it was for the sake of mutual desire, influence, or the unspoken rules of power that dominated the industry. The most compelling of these relationships was with director Michael Curtiz, who was responsible for Flynn's most famous films. Curtiz, who was known for his legendary films like Casablanca, 1942, had an undeniable chemistry with Flynn. The two spent long hours together on set, often locking eyes in moments of deep intensity. While nothing was ever confirmed, rumors swirled that their collaboration went beyond the professional realm. Curtiz, who had long been known for his own secretive lifestyle, was said to have enjoyed a private romance with Flynn that was kept under wraps for years. It wasn't just Flynn's co-stars who were part of this web of secrecy. It was the power brokers of Hollywood who also fell under his spell. His relationship with these influential figures, whether sexual, emotional, or professional, was a driving force behind his career. It also contributed to the environment of fear and repressed desires that defined much of Hollywood during its golden age. Flynn's complicated relationships with both men and women also helped shape his public persona. He was forever the charming, swashbuckling hero of the screen, yet his private life was a stark contrast to that image. The stories of his hidden romances and affairs painted a more complex picture of the man who had once seemed so untouchable and flawless in the eyes of the public. In reality, Flynn was a man of contradictions, both a beloved icon and a man who struggled to reconcile his public image with his private desires. But Flynn was not the only one involved in these clandestine relationships. The whole industry was built on a fragile facade of public perfection, and many other stars of the time were hiding the truth about their own sexuality. It was this web of secrecy that kept Hollywood's glittering stars, like Flynn, tethered to an image that ultimately didn't align with who they truly were. As the years went by, more and more of these stories began to leak, with Flynn's involvement in them being one of the most captivating. His secret relationships with women and men were a glimpse into a hidden side of Hollywood that would continue to fascinate audiences for decades. As the years passed, Errol Flynn's secret relationships with both male and female stars became a powerful symbol of the hidden truths of Hollywood. While the industry's public-facing personas were carefully crafted to fit into the clean-cut ideals of the time, the truth about the romantic entanglements of the stars began to surface more frequently, revealing a complex, underground world that few had dared to speak about. Flynn's relationships with other Hollywood icons were not merely about lust. They were about a deeper, unspoken bond that many in the industry shared, the desire to break free from the oppressive constraints of public life and live on their own terms. One of the most intriguing and unexpected aspects of Flynn's hidden relationships was his rumored connection with the stunning and enigmatic actress Greta Garbo. Known for her intense mystery and resistance to the public eye, Garbo was an ideal partner for Flynn, a man who, like her, thrived in the shadows. In contrast to his public life as a swashbuckling hero, Flynn's connection with Garbo, as reported by insiders, was far more grounded and personal. The pair reportedly shared a profound understanding of each other's struggles with fame and the immense pressure to conform to the world's expectations. Garbo, who was notoriously private and a fierce protector of her own image, found a kindred spirit in Flynn. It was said that their relationship allowed them to escape the constant prying eyes of the media. They would often meet in private locations, away from the watchful gaze of Hollywood, where they could just be themselves, without the glamour, without the facade. These meetings were said to be filled with deep conversations about their shared experiences in the industry, and it was clear that both Garbo and Flynn craved a level of authenticity that could not exist in the world of their public personas. However, just as their relationship seemed to be a sanctuary, it was also incredibly precarious. The risk of their private relationship being exposed was always looming over them. In Hollywood, the revelation of such relationships was more than just a scandal. It could be the end of a career. Both Garbo and Flynn understood this very well. Their love affair, though passionate and intense, had to be kept in the strictest secrecy, something that ultimately kept them from truly being free. Aside from Garbo, Flynn's affair with actress and singer Marlene Dietrich would go down in history as one of the most talked about but secretive connections in Hollywood. Dietrich, like Flynn, was known for her beauty, her boldness, and her refusal to conform to the industry's ideals of femininity. What most people didn't know was that Flynn and Dietrich had an ongoing affair that lasted for years, one that went far beyond just a physical attraction. Their bond was built on mutual admiration and a shared understanding of the complex nature of fame. The relationship between Flynn and Dietrich, much like his connection with Garbo, was shrouded in secrecy. They would often rendezvous at private clubs, away from the eyes of the paparazzi, sharing stolen moments of intimacy that no one would ever guess existed. Their affair wasn't just about the passionate encounters. It was a rebellion against the suffocating demands of public life. Both actors knew what was at stake, and yet they couldn't deny the magnetic pull that existed between them. But Flynn's relationships with these women weren't just about passion. They were also about identity and survival. In an industry where every move was scrutinized, these relationships allowed him to maintain his public image while still pursuing his true desires. As a man constantly navigating the world of powerful men and women, Flynn's relationships were also about leveraging his star power to achieve a sense of autonomy in an environment that was built on the exploitation of talent. The hidden love stories that intertwined with Flynn's career were not isolated incidents. They were part of a much larger pattern in Hollywood at the time. Flynn's ability to maintain relationships with other stars, even when they defied convention, revealed the deeply rooted nature of secrecy in the industry. Many of these relationships were born out of a desire to escape the constraints of the roles Hollywood forced them into, and, in many ways, these relationships were acts of defiance. Despite the secrecy surrounding his liaisons, Flynn's openness about his relationships with men and women began to chip away at the carefully constructed image of masculinity that Hollywood worked so hard to preserve. He had defied the norms, not just in his career but in his private life as well. His willingness to name the men and women he had loved was an act of courage in an era where silence was the only safe option. Flynn knew that by sharing these hidden parts of his life, he was allowing others to see the man behind the myth, a man who had lived outside the confines of a perfect, scripted existence. Through these relationships, Flynn not only broke down barriers, but also created a pathway for other stars to begin revealing their own truths. In an era where homosexuality was condemned and closeted relationships were the norm, Flynn's openness in discussing his affairs created an early, though tentative, shift in Hollywood's approach to personal identity. His relationships were a reflection of an era that was slowly evolving, an era in which the once opaque world of Hollywood secrets would eventually begin to crumble under the weight of truth. The tension between the glitzy, glamorous public persona of Hollywood stars and the darker, hidden truths behind closed doors was a constant theme throughout Errol Flynn's life. In an industry driven by image and status, secrets weren't just a byproduct. They were a survival mechanism. For Flynn, the pressure to remain silent about his relationships, especially his affairs with other men, was immense. In an era when being openly gay could destroy a career, the stakes were high. Hollywood was not yet ready to embrace such complexities, and anyone who dared to expose them risked falling from grace. Flynn was acutely aware of this pressure. The very industry that had catapulted him to fame, an industry that adored its handsome, rugged leading man, demanded that he maintain the illusion of a perfect life. The studios created carefully curated personas for their stars, and these personas were often shaped by the need to appear straight and fully aligned with the norms of mainstream American society. The public had to believe that Flynn was the quintessential ladies' man, a heartthrob who enjoyed the attention of beautiful women. The truth was far more complicated, and it's this duality, publicly adored playboy, privately struggling with his desires, that defined much of Flynn's life. The consequences of revealing the truth about his sexuality, or even just acknowledging the secret relationships he had with men, would have been catastrophic. At the height of his career, Flynn was not just a star, he was a symbol of Hollywood itself. His swashbuckling roles and charming public persona were exactly what fans expected from movies. To deviate from that mold would have jeopardized everything he had worked for. Hollywood, at that time, wasn't a forgiving place for anyone who dared to step outside its rigid boundaries. For years, Flynn played the game. He maintained the image of the heterosexual heartthrob while quietly engaging in relationships that did not align with the public's view of him. His personal life, especially his sexual preferences, had to be hidden under layers of secrecy. The stakes for revealing these truths were enormous, not just for his career, but for his identity as a star. The pressure to conform to the industry's expectations was so intense that it almost became suffocating. The very people who had raised him to stardom were also the ones who demanded that he stay silent about who he truly was. But despite the heavy toll the secrecy took on Flynn, he was not the only one who faced such a burden. Hollywood in the early to mid-20th century was full of stars who found themselves trapped in a cage of their own creation, forced to maintain facades that contradicted their true selves. The pressure to appear perfect in the eyes of the public was all-consuming. For many stars, this meant never acknowledging relationships that didn't fit the heteronormative narrative. But for some, including Flynn, the cost of this silence was steep. Flynn's secret relationships with other men weren't isolated events. He wasn't the only actor secretly living a double life. In fact, many other major stars of the time were also navigating the same treacherous waters. Names like Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift, and Tab Hunter were all linked to similar struggles. The difference with Flynn, however, was his willingness, much later in life, to confront the world with his truths, especially after the Hollywood system had already shifted. By that time, many of his peers had already fallen out of favor, and Hollywood was beginning to question the suffocating, archaic standards that it had upheld for so long. But even in the face of increasing public awareness about the complexities of sexuality, Flynn still carried the scars of years spent hiding who he truly was. His ability to discuss these relationships and to open up about his personal life in later years was an act of defiance, one that broke away from the traditional notion of the silent stoic star. The reluctance to speak out about his own truths, however, was not a weakness. It was a survival instinct. Flynn's ability to navigate the complex web of Hollywood's unwritten rules spoke to his resilience and his understanding of the industry's dangerous power dynamics. Flynn's story sheds light on the painful reality that many actors faced during this era. Their lives were not entirely their own. They were shaped and molded by the pressures of an industry that prized public image over personal freedom. For many, the fear of being outed was all-consuming, and the risk of public shaming was so real that it forced stars to suppress their identities in order to survive. Flynn's struggles with this reality serve as a powerful reminder of the dangers of secrecy and the emotional toll it took on those who had to endure it. But as the years passed and Hollywood underwent a dramatic shift in its approach to sexuality and identity, the very people who had been forced into silence began to speak out. Flynn's own willingness to address his hidden relationships allowed others to do the same. His story, though marked by tragedy and secrecy, also became a beacon of hope for those who felt trapped by the industry's unspoken rules. He had survived in an era that demanded conformity and silence, and yet, in the end, he reclaimed his narrative, one of truth, complexity, and self-acceptance. Errol Flynn's decision to break the silence surrounding his secret relationships came at a time when Hollywood was changing, but the consequences were far-reaching. By the time Flynn finally opened up about his hidden affairs, the world around him had shifted, but not entirely. While it was no longer as taboo to discuss the complexities of sexuality, Hollywood's culture still lingered in the shadows, reluctant to embrace the full spectrum of sexual identities. For Flynn, speaking out was an act of liberation, but it also cemented his place in Hollywood history as someone who had lived a life defined by secrecy and rebellion. As Flynn began to openly discuss his relationships with other men, many saw his revelations as a cathartic moment, one that challenged the conventions of an industry steeped in straight-laced fantasies. He had spent much of his life trapped within the expectations of stardom, never fully allowed to be himself. It's difficult to understate just how revolutionary it was for someone of Flynn's stature to finally lift the veil on the forbidden aspects of Hollywood's past. However, the repercussions of that choice were not as simple as being hailed as a hero of the LGBTQ+ community. Despite the public's increasing curiosity and the rise of activism in the decades following Flynn's revelations, the Hollywood establishment was not ready to fully embrace this new narrative. The industry had already moved on to other stars, and Flynn's career had largely waned by the time he made his admissions. Though he had a long history as a beloved star, his revelations didn't result in a resurgence in his popularity, at least, not immediately. The stigma still lingered, and many viewed him as an outcast or someone living in the past. His shocking revelations were met with a mix of admiration and hesitation, depending on who you asked. Yet, in the years following his death, Flynn's willingness to live openly in his later years was looked at with more respect. The idea that Hollywood had once kept its stars confined by the walls of silence and shame, only to later allow them to speak out, added a layer of complexity to Flynn's legacy. He became not just a legendary actor of swashbuckling roles and iconic adventures, but also a symbol of the shifting tides in Hollywood. His story represents both the end of one era and the beginnings of another, an era where stars might one day have the freedom to be unapologetically themselves, regardless of their sexual orientation. For those who had known Flynn and witnessed the highs and lows of his career, there was a sense of both relief and sorrow. They saw the man behind the myth, a man who had spent so many years hiding behind the image of the perfect leading man. Flynn had been both a victim of Hollywood's rigid expectations and a courageous figure who fought back against them. His decision to expose the secret aspects of his life was, In many ways, a final defiance against the system that had confined him. But the fact that his courage didn't immediately bring about the kind of widespread applause one might expect reveals the deep-seated prejudices still present in the industry during that time. In the broader cultural context, Flynn's revelations were a part of a larger movement toward greater visibility and acceptance of LGBTQ+ identities in both Hollywood and society. His willingness to speak out, however late, was an important moment in the slow but steady shift toward a more inclusive entertainment world. It opened the door for future generations of actors and performers who no longer had to hide their identities in the shadows, but also showed how far Hollywood still had to go. By the time Flynn's story became a part of the public discourse, there was a new generation of stars who had the opportunity to live more freely. The trailblazing efforts of people like Rock Hudson, Montgomery Clift, and Flynn himself laid the foundation for more progressive discussions of sexuality in the entertainment industry. But Flynn's career was far more complicated than a mere footnote in this larger narrative. He was a man who had existed in the gap between eras, straddling the line between the old Hollywood system that demanded conformity and the new world that was slowly but surely embracing change. Though Flynn's own career may have been on the decline by the time he made his public admissions, his legacy as an icon, someone who had lived a double life, was undeniable. The star who once embodied a particular vision of masculinity now represented a more nuanced reality. Flynn had revealed not just his sexuality, but the hidden undercurrents of the Hollywood machine itself, where secrecy and silence were often the price of stardom. His story added complexity to the cultural narrative of Hollywood's golden age, reminding us that even the most beloved stars were often burdened by secrets that could never fully escape. As time passed, Errol Flynn became more than just a screen legend. He became an emblem of the fight for personal freedom in the face of immense societal pressure. His revelations were part of a larger, ongoing conversation about the intersection of fame, identity, and the courage to live authentically. Though the world may not have fully understood or appreciated his truth at the time, Flynn's story would eventually inspire others to find the strength to live their own truths, no matter the cost. After Errol Flynn's admissions about his secret relationships, the entertainment world was faced with a complex set of reactions. Hollywood, a place built on the construction of fantasy, suddenly had to confront the uncomfortable reality of its most famous stars' private lives. Flynn's story was a watershed moment that would go on to impact the landscape of Hollywood for years to come. Though it didn't happen overnight, his willingness to speak out slowly started chipping away at the long-standing barriers that had kept LGBTQ+ identities hidden in the shadows. At the time of his revelations, Hollywood was still a world where the studio system held much power. For many actors, their careers were controlled and molded by powerful studios that dictated their public personas and private lives. If a star like Flynn had been forced to stay in the closet for most of his career, it was due to the industry's fear that their public image would suffer if their personal lives were exposed. Despite the cultural shifts happening in the world at large, Hollywood's executives had little appetite for embracing the idea that stars could have complexities in their personal lives. Errol Flynn's choice to come forward, however, began to unravel that tightly woven web of secrecy. Though Hollywood wasn't ready to fully embrace his truth, his admissions sparked an undercurrent of change. For one, Flynn's revelations opened up the conversation about the power structures within the industry and how they affected not just LGBTQ+ individuals, but also anyone whose identity didn't fit into the narrow molds of the industry. It forced people to ask, who gets to decide what a star should look like? Who gets to determine which identities are worthy of being seen? Flynn's story was the beginning of a more inclusive narrative that started to unfold in Hollywood. Over time, the entertainment industry began to evolve, albeit slowly. The path that Flynn had carved out, while not immediately embraced, laid the groundwork for other actors in the future. In the 1980s and 1990s, a number of stars began to break free from the confines of the closet, starting with actors like Rock Hudson, who publicly came out during the early days of the AIDS crisis. Flynn's bravery, although not immediately appreciated, had paved the way for future generations to live more authentically in the public eye. But what about Flynn's immediate circle? His revelation about his secret romantic entanglements forced many of his contemporaries to reconsider their own lives. A number of actors from Hollywood's golden age also lived with secrets about their sexual identities, some of whom were eventually forced to confront their own truths in public. The courage of Errol Flynn allowed those who followed to reflect on their own journeys and made the industry more aware of its own inherent hypocrisy. By acknowledging his own hidden relationships, Flynn inadvertently set a precedent that changed the tone of conversations about sexual identity and representation in Hollywood for years to come. Yet, it was a long time before the full impact of Flynn's words was realized. Hollywood, especially during the time of his revelations, wasn't exactly known for its progressive views on LGBTQ+ rights. In fact, much of the public discourse in the decades that followed was marked by tension between Hollywood's star system and the demands for more inclusive storytelling. While Flynn's admissions were ahead of their time, they didn't fully dismantle the barriers or the stigma surrounding LGBTQ+ lives in the industry. It wasn't until the late 20th century that Hollywood began to more openly recognize the diversity of its talent, with openly LGBTQ+ characters finally beginning to appear in film and television in more prominent ways. But even then, the journey was fraught with resistance and challenges. The stories of past stars like Flynn, though part of Hollywood's history, weren't always celebrated, especially during his lifetime. However, in retrospect, Flynn's courage to speak out became one of the first cracks in the rigid walls of secrecy that once defined the entertainment industry. His story also created a powerful conversation about the intersections between fame and personal identity. The more stars came forward in the following years, the more it became evident that there had been an entire generation of actors who had hidden aspects of themselves for fear of losing their careers. Flynn's decision to step into the light served as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope for others. His legacy is not just that of a swashbuckling actor, but that of someone who was willing to sacrifice the glamorous facade of Hollywood for a chance to live honestly, no matter the cost. Today, Errol Flynn's name stands not just as a symbol of a bygone era of movie-making, but also as a key figure in the broader evolution of Hollywood. His legacy goes beyond the silver screen. It is a reminder that the entertainment industry, like any other part of society, has evolved and continues to evolve. The shadows of old Hollywood have slowly given way to a more inclusive, open, and diverse future. Flynn's revelations, though not fully embraced during his lifetime, played a pivotal role in reshaping the industry and its treatment of LGBTQ+ talent and stories. And though the world might not have fully understood Flynn's truth at the time, his honesty continues to resonate. In many ways, his legacy is a reflection of the cultural shifts that still unfold today. The story of Errol Flynn serves as both a mirror to Hollywood's past and a testament to the courage it takes to push boundaries and reveal truths that are often hidden. It is a legacy that continues to inspire those who dare to be themselves, no matter the cost.